online. This is the October meeting of the Massachusetts Board of Early Education and Care. We have an agenda that is largely first a follow-on to September's meeting around just accepting the market rate survey and reflecting there, which drives into our work on rates, both considering federal process and compliance and sort of where we are in the context of our rates more generally. And then we will spend a little time on the EEOST proposal in front of us for some regulation revisions. Let me just say, process-wise, as a board, we've got a little flexibility in terms of where we land on this second agenda item as to the rate increases and the overall strategy. Obviously, the across the board is in a lot of ways a good news story and overdue. And there's some strategy and some decision making involved in a little bit of projecting on where we ought to land. We'll say more about that as part of the commissioner's presentation and our discussion, but I just want to say, as a matter of process, we shouldn't feel the need to rush anything, and we should be sure we have a little bit of time for discussion and deliberation, and if we need to push anything to November, we can, and that will not impact the timing of disbursement to the field. So let's be sure that we are operating in alignment and in terms of good process and getting to where we feel like we're ready for a vote. So with that, I will turn it over to the Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have much to add. Just two notes. I think one is, even though the legislature has sort of adjourned its formal session, they still are meeting in informal sessions and are still able to move things forward by unanimous consent. One of those things which we expect to happen, certainly hope will happen, is the adoption of a supplemental budget, a final SUP for FY22. And in doing so, there is and potentially additional SUPs that go beyond FY22 into FY23 and even further. And in hopes, I guess, that happens, I do want to reiterate what hopefully folks in this room know, but others may not be fully aware of, is that the governor's proposed $55 million in funding, additional funding for early education and care, specifically $45 million for a down payment assistance program for family child care providers and $10 million for an innovation fund. So those things are still on the table, and hopefully the legislature will take them up before the end of the year. And then finally, next week is STEM Week, and hopefully some of our providers, both for small children and after-school programs, will be sort of recognizing the week and the occasion by sort of amplifying or promoting some of its STEM-related, some of their STEM-related work. But next week, starting on October 17th through the 21st, it'll be STEM Week. So all things STEM are welcome and encouraged.
Great.
So back to you.
Thank you, Secretary. Commissioner.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and Secretary. Just adding a little bit to the governor's supplemental budget was also $10 million for safety and security initiatives for the early education and care field, which we are eagerly hoping there'll be action taken on so that we can move that forward, especially given the events of the last weeks. I wanted to thank the board for your vote last month among the chaos of our technology around the subsidy regs. We took a small vote that had a very big impact for families in terms of allowing families who are in the appeals or hearing process to continue their subsidy while they go through that process. And our legal team has been hard at work implementing that change and has heard from many families great relief of the ability to maintain stability and care for their families while they go through that process. And I say that because next month and the following month we'll be talking about a number of other changes that will continue that same work to put families at the center of our child care financial assistance system and ensure there's a level of stability and ease of access that really places children and their parents and their working parents at the center. So we're looking forward to the next couple months of conversations around those, and that was a great precursor to our work. So thank you again for your support of that. We have been talking about the background record check process with you, and I'm very pleased to say that we hit our September 30th federal compliance deadline for 2 additional checks, which ensure the safety of children in care, and we've done that largely without great disruptions in time or technology to the field. And I want to thank the team internally. We were calling it a minor change when we were talking about it publicly, because we hoped that's how it felt to our providers, but it was a huge amount of work internally for the team, and we are the first in the nation, I think, state who's been able to do the out-of-state checks, and we are still working through the exact process on that with other states, but I'm really proud of the work the team has done. And although September 30th was a compliance federal driving deadline, we are engaged in a much broader reform of the background record check process. And so as part of the changes over the last month, we've moved family child care into our more modern navigator system from the old legacy system. So things are being done much more quickly in a much more automated way. We're stopped using mail, which is remarkable. And the next step in that process is really figuring out how to bring our residential programs over. So, you know, we talk about the background record check. It's really important operational. It's really important for keeping kids safe. But it's also a process that can either facilitate or inhibit the timeline for a candidate from the time they're identified as being wanting to be hired to the time they can actually get in the classroom. So worried about federal compliance, worried about modernizing the system and making it work better, but most importantly, we want to make sure that we're shortening the length of time as part of our whole workforce initiative. Making sure we're getting those safety checks done, but making sure educators can get into classrooms so we can get those classrooms open and kids enrolled. I'm also excited to say that the Administration for Children and Families, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, in collaboration with the Federal Department of Education, has put out a new opportunity for a competitive preschool development grant. Massachusetts is eligible for this. It would be $12 million for 3 years, over three years, $12 million each year. And we are hard at work on that application. The overall scope of it is around systems building for birth through 3rd grade. And our framework is really around supporting in collaboration with many other agencies, but particularly Department of Elementary and Secondary Education 3rd grade reading scores. MCAS scores came out recently, and I think we were all not surprised, given the COVID disruptions, that there's a real opportunity for us to work across systems to improve 3rd grade reading. And that means investing in teachers, investing in the supports and behavioral supports that can help kids stay in classrooms. And so we think this grant gives us a great opportunity not just to build on the work that's been done previously in 2019 through a planning grant, but also accelerate some of the work we've been talking about family engagement, quality initiatives, and supporting our workforce to have the skills and competencies to work with kids in the classrooms. So that grant is due November 7th, so by the time you see us, everyone will have much darker circles under their eyes, but hopefully that grant will get in, and we're excited about that opportunity, particularly in collaboration with our colleagues in other state agencies. Our November board meeting will be in Springfield, so we're looking forward to seeing you all there, and again, an opportunity for us to dig more deeply into some of our work around child care financial assistance. So, thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We'll turn now to public comment. Want to invite, we have 3 folks signed up for public comment. We typically stay around 3 minutes. We have Bill Eddy up and Don DiStefano on deck.
Seems like a long time since I've last been at an EC board meeting. And on behalf of my home city, I apologize for our internet last meeting. But we are easily dazzled by your really high-tech elevator, so. My name is William Eddy, for those of you who I haven't met on this board. And I am the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Association of Early Education and Care. We are the trade association for early education programs across the state. Our members collectively, from North Adams to Boston, provide the majority of subsidy care put out by the department, and we thank you for your efforts here on this board. Mrs. Secretary, great to see you, Madam Chairwoman. Commissioner, thank you for having me today. I'm here today to talk about the early education rate reserve that is in front of you, and I appreciate the board chair's thoughts, and we appreciate your efforts to get this out in December. It's a big help to programs who will be looking forward to it. I want to touch base on the 3 parts of the rate reserve. First is the $40 million that the legislature chose to put out as a quality add-on. We're very appreciative of the department's efforts to get the 8.5% out and their efforts to ensure that it's annualized. I do want to say a word on behalf of the language, because I know there's some concern about it, especially as it relates to the feds on market rate. The legislature, I believe, looked at it for two reasons. One, to ensure an across-the-board rate reserve, and given the size of the reserve, to ensure that it did not have a negative impact on private pay rates. We're under waivers right now from OSD regarding private pay parents' rates not being tied to the subsidy rate. Those waivers aren't going to go on forever. And so there's concern that as we keep raising rates, especially larger rate increases, that it will have a negative impact on private parents whose rates will have to mirror that increase. And so I think the legislature is trying to separate the two issues. And the second thing is we've long advocated that you cannot fix the salary structure, fundamental poor salary structure of our workforce by just raising rates. By looking to separate rates from workforce salaries, which this does, the rate is not going up. It's an equality add-on. It's a great precedent. I know some will say that C3 grants accomplish that, but we're concerned about the long-term viability of C3 grants. And I'd urge you to look at the last line of the line item that the legislature has very consciously put in there on C3 grants that talks about the need for the department to work with providers to navigate the fiscal cliff of that funding. You never see that kind of language in a rate reserve, but yet it remains in C3, which signals to us that the legislature is not all in on this long term. And so until we figure out the viability long term of C3 grants, we continue to look for ways to separate where our workforce is paid from the actual rate of reimbursement. And so we think this is a good precedent. The second thing is the supportive increase. Can't thank the department enough for looking for ways to fund the supportive increase away from the $60 million. Look, I think as you all know, supportive child care helps our most at-risk and our most vulnerable children. Those are children who are in the 51A DCF cases. They require the most attention, the most need, and the fact that the department is navigating that in a way and prioritizing it, we're very appreciative. And I know the commission would be disappointed if I didn't have something to say about market rate. We remain concerned. We have for years in your previous boards as they have existed, we have said over years that market rate is a fundamentally flawed concept. That choosing to set a rate for subsidy based on what privates are charging as opposed to what it costs to provide care is a fundamentally flawed concept that the feds have long held to that we should challenge. And so I say to you, as you look at the 75th percentile, what is the stated goal? Take a good look at the numbers. Multiply them by 261 days. You'll note that in Region 6, they're calling for infant rate care that would annually cost private parents $38,000 a year. $146 is the subsidy rate at 75th percentile in Boston for infant care. That's $38,000 a year. They have a preschool rate in Region 4 at the 75th percentile that would bring us to $26,000 annually for preschool care. In our wildest days of seeking rate reserves, we've never said that's what care costs. And I would suggest to you that the market rate is fundamentally flawed. And frankly, if you look at some of the rates that are coming into this, and we're not suggesting to you that you shouldn't vote this today. We're not, or even next month. But we're suggesting to you that we need to make a change on what we're looking at. I mean, if you look at some of the market rate adjustments, you're going to have 4 regions of the state that some rates are getting 30, 35 cent increases, while some regions are getting $10 to $20 increases. It's not a way to make a statewide system of care. And so that's where I would leave you is, I'd ask you as a board to work with the department to look at how do you create cost-based rates? How do you look at a different approach? How do you look at how your even regions are constructed? The regions right now, they were made years and years ago. And if you look at one of your most high-cost regions, Region 4, ESC doesn't even have an office for Region 4. I mean, so they're not real targeted of what is the actual market in an actual community. They involve communities that are contiguous to each other that have tremendous gaps and variances in what their market rates are. So I'd ask that you work with the provider community. I'd ask that the board works with the department to look at what is a appropriate rate structure for subsidy rates, and to look at in future endeavors of rate increases that we can have a different kind of discussion. But I really do want to thank you for your service on this board, and for the commissioner and the department's efforts to get this rate increase out to providers who badly need it. So I thank you for allowing me to go probably a little more than 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don DiStefano?
I've been here 6 years and 2 months in a row.
know,
I
it's
get in front of you.
fabulous.
So thank you. My name is Dawn DiStefano, and
sorry.
that's okay.
DiStefano,
That's okay.
got it.
I'm used to it. I serve as the president and CEO of Square One. Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary, Commissioner, Chairwoman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of my community and the Commonwealth's most vulnerable children and families. I come before you with a hopeful heart. I, like Bill, am very grateful and thankful. I truly believe we are heading in the direction of adjusting our reimbursement system in a way that will reflect the needs of all children and families. At the September meeting, we witnessed for the first time, or at least the first time for me, the true cost of providing care. For some regions, a staggering difference between today's rate and a more accurate account for expenses. For an agency such as Square One, this was the day we were waiting for. However, there is still much to do and hurdles to overcome. I've reviewed the proposed rate and add-on changes, and I'm very grateful for a potential approximate 10% increase in our region. But I would ask you to consider some of the unintended consequences of your potential actions. The process of prioritizing regions by percentile of market rate amounts is the equivalent in my region to a poverty trap, where the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. However, in this situation, no one's getting rich by any means. Some regions would stand to earn a rate that exceeds the current estimated cost of providing care and early learning, while others, including my Region 1, stand to fall short yet again. According to the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, Hampden County has the highest SVI rate in the entire Commonwealth, and oddly enough has sustained the lowest subsidy rate for decades. If we reflect using this trend, it's easy to compare to the redlining of low-income neighborhoods and countries. It's a simple formula: lack of targeted investment for people with the highest need and the lowest opportunity for change, resulting in increased need and decreased ability to grow and thrive. If the board moves forward with a vote to continue prioritizing regions based on market surveys, it is unequivocally sending the message that the most vulnerable children will continue to receive less than every other region, while maintaining the knowledge and understanding that they need more. Our current rate in Region 1 is roughly 80% of true cost, resulting in a need to fundraise. Square One has to raise approximately $500,000 every year just to break even. This doesn't allow for any quality improvements, additional support staff, or any creative investments. With the proposed rate change, Region 1 would still receive the lowest rate in the Commonwealth and only 88% of true cost. Other regions would exceed the estimated cost of care by over 130%. How can we continue to ignore the cries for help in our most vulnerable area of our state? How can we stand by while regions with the least amount of resources receive the lowest rates? As it stands today, Region 1 receives 20% less than the highest reimbursed region, and with the proposed rate change would receive almost 40% less. What is the solution, you ask? Follow the legislation. We understand you have to provide a standard rate increase, but ensure the maximum obligation leaves room for a higher investment in the most vulnerable areas. Leverage your knowledge and practice reflected in the C3 funding, using standard funding amounts with add-on rates for the areas with the highest social vulnerability. My Square One children share my optimism. They believe that professional adults spend our work days engaged in decisions and problem solving that focuses on what they need. It is heartbreaking for me to review decisions that run counter to what my children believe is happening. And yet, I have hope. I believe, much like my Square One children, that you will do what's best. You will listen and reflect on this fact alone. The regions with children that have the highest need for food, early learning, high-quality mental health supports should receive a rate that, at a minimum, meets the estimated cost of care. In fact, I believe these regions should have combined rates at the highest level, reflecting an investment in the core basic cost of early learning for what they need to achieve an equitable life. I commit to you that I will continue raising $500,000 every year, but I would prefer to do that for quality improvements rather than keeping the lights on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve Huntley.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good to see you. It's been a while since we've been in a room like this together. I appreciate you having it in person. I appreciate being in the room with you all as this important topic is talked about. My name is Steve Huntley. I'm Executive Director of Valley Opportunity Council. We have 8 centers in Holyoke and Chicopee, and we offer about 110 home educators throughout the county. So we're in the balance of county, Hampden County. I've been presenting the Western Mass inequity for many years to some familiar faces in this group, some new faces in this group. Today out west, an infant rate is $65.71. In Metro Boston, the infant rate is $97.60 for a difference of $31.89, or $5.32 per child per day. $5.32 per child per day. That's today. The cost that was presented last month, out west for an infant, $127.62. Metro Boston, $132.12 with a difference of $4.50. So we're getting less per child than the cost. The numbers say the same. 75 cents a day is the difference, the shortcoming or the difference in those two. So we're getting paid $5.32 when the cost is 75 cents. I've urged the board to act on the promises that have been made over the past 6 years, that we hold our nose to the market rate and that we look at something new. 6 years we've heard it. 6 years we've watched the gap grow more and more and more, and the rates continue to get inequitable. I ask you to delay this vote and reduce and consider other alternatives, potentially reducing the number of regions, potentially looking at other scenarios that could look at ways to try and make it more equitable, meanwhile keeping the federal government happy, because I understand they're a major investor in this system and we have to keep them happy. I get that. I live that every day as a community action agency leader. But are there other ways we can look at it? Does DESE have an interesting way where they found a way to funnel money into poor communities out west like Holyoke and Springfield through a receivership type of program where resources are there, substantial gains are being made? Are there things like that that could work, that could pacify the federal government? Can these things be investigated? And the last piece of information that I'd urge you to take a look at is the wait list. The wait list out west is substantially higher than the wait list throughout the balance of state. It's no coincidence that our rates are lowest, the number of programs are going out of business, the need is there, but there aren't programs to actually meet those needs, so our wait list continues to grow or hover at 1.5 years was the last I'd seen it. So please take a look. Bill said it far more eloquently than I ever could. Please take a look at this. We're struggling out west. Don mentioned raising $500,000 a year. We're a large organization. Our budget's around $52 million a year. We have commercial properties that generate resources. We have market rate housing that generate resources. This is how we keep our child care centers open for the 1,000 kids we serve every day. It's hard to stay in business doing child care when it's a failed model. I have friends who have closed down centers, who have closed down, and they're far smarter business people than I am, because the reality is it doesn't make sense to keep our lights on and our doors open. for any business reason whatsoever. Our rates are just so below what it actually costs to do everything. So again, thank you all for your time. Thank you for your volunteering on this board. It's sometimes a thankless cause, I understand, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I think we'll bring those comments into our second agenda item and certainly make sure that we have a very full discussion about all of the possibilities, understanding also some of the constraints bureaucratically, since we need to be in compliance, if that makes sense to folks. Okay, thank you all, Bill, Don, Steve. Let's just move through some routine business. We have two sets of minutes in front of us, one from the September 7th retreat and one set from the September 13th meeting in Worcester. So I want to start, any edits, comments on the retreat set of minutes in front of us? Everybody okay? All right, let me make the motion that we approve the minutes from the September 7th strategic planning retreat of the board. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Nikki Ruiz?
Yes.
Maura Siegel?
Yes.
Carolyn Kane?
Yes.
Secretary Pizer?
Yes.
Paul Belcito?
Yes.
Jamila Lee?
Yes.
Maria Moeller?
Yes.
Allison, you were absent. Thank you. Okay, we have one other set, the meeting in Worcester, September 12th or 13th. I have two different numbers in front of me. 12th? Let's say 12th.
I'll
Anyone
make a
want-
motion to approve the minutes from the
Oh,
September
Carolyn,
board meeting.
thank you. Second?
Second.
All right, Nikki Ruiz,
Yes.
Maura Siegel,
Yes.
Carolyn Can, you made
Yes.
this, yes. Secretary Pizer?
Yes.
Paul Belcito?
Yes.
Jamila Lee?
Yes.
Maria Moeller?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, third item of business. We have not had a vice chairperson in that seat since Mary Wallachie left the board. And so two things on that. First, Paul Belcito has graciously accepted the offer to become the vice chairperson of the board as an engaged partner, and we want to thank him for that. At the same time, I want to tell all of you that I, after the December meeting, will be stepping out of this role after 7 years plus, and Paul will serve as acting chair until the new administration appoints a new chair. So, as I said, I think at our retreat when we were all meeting, Governor Charlie Baker appointed me when my Charlie was about 5 months, and he's now in grade 2, and it's been fabulous, and I look forward to the next couple months, and thank you, Paul, for your service and partnership. So to put Paul in the vice chairperson seat, we have a motion that I will put forward on the floor. Move that the Board of Early Education and Care hereby elects Paul Belcito as vice chairperson of the board. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Nikki Ruiz?
Yes.
Maura Siegel?
Yes.
Carolyn Kane?
Yes.
Secretary Pizer?
Yes.
Allison Schoenwald?
Yes.
Thank you. Jamila Lee?
Yes.
Maria Moeller?
Yes.
Thank you. Approved. Thank you, Paul, for your partnership.
Congratulations.
Thank you. All right, next item. We have, since we last met, we formed a workforce recruitment and retention work group. It had its first meeting. Thank you to Maria for chairing the group, and she will give us a rundown of the September meeting. Maybe as early October.
October.
Yeah.
So we met on October 5th. It was our first meeting as a workforce working group, and it was a very general introduction meeting. Attendees were myself, our board chair, Nani Lasso, and board members, Maura Siegel, Jamila Lee, and Paul Belcito. Our acting commissioner, Kershaw, was there as well. And from EEC, we had Jocelyn Mound, Sarah Volken, and Eugenia Soils, Chris Power, and Christian Kelly. Like I said, it was a high-level meeting, just introducing some of the issues that we currently have need to address in the workforce for the early education field. And we focused the meeting on 3 key strategies. First one, it was targeted recruitment and support for new family childcare educators to become licensed and sustain operations. The second one was early education pathway support models, such as apprenticeships, training programs, and educator supports to facilitate access to higher education, including streamlining access to scholarship resources and tuition reimbursement. And the third one was a public relations and information campaign to elevate the field as a whole and support and magnify recruitment and retention efforts. On the first item, with regards to family childcare, we quickly came up with the need that we needed to understand this part of the field a little better as a group. And so we identified some items that would be helpful to understand. For example, best practices in the family childcare, on family childcare systems, and ways that we can incentivize systems to take on additional family childcare providers. And what kind of supports are independent family childcare providers receiving when they don't belong to a system, and how can EEC provide those supports instead? And again, this is just a summary of the meeting. There are minutes that we will be approving later. Sarah Volkanen also noted that there is already significant work ongoing at the agency that looks at supporting family childcare, and that she's going to bring us some of that information for our next committee meeting. The discussion then moved with regards to family childcare, we also discussed the need of a cost analysis for family childcare specific prototypes. Obviously that will help us understand better the rate. And there's also recent data that shows an increase in the number of family childcare providers entering the field as compared to center-based programs. And again, that's an interesting trend to keep in mind, and that the work we do has to be intentional about the economic mobility of these providers so that they can see this as a career opportunity that they will be, they will grow in, and that particularly women of color actually have this, that are mostly the participants in some of our areas, they can actually become family childcare providers, and again, as a career, and that leads into being successful business owners within their communities. There was also a discussion about how emerging technologies could play a role in supporting this sector, such as the model being implemented by Wonder Schools. So, we're going to take a look a little bit deeper into that. Then the conversation moved into the various professional pathway support models that exist in the state right now. And there was consensus amongst the group that the apprenticeship model was very worthwhile to take a look at. I mean, there's a lot of models going on right now in the field, and it's just really encouraging that the department is, wants to learn from all of them and see what role they play with regards to supporting those existing programs, and maybe just continue growing them, while also respecting individual needs of the communities that actually are implementing these programs. So there's also a need to establish general clarity around the pathway of early childhood education. But again, we are going to, obviously next steps include looking at the existing models and just taking a deeper look at them and what they have in common. And then with regards to the public information campaign, we basically, we need to look at what the scope and the approach would be for a public information campaign. Everybody was in agreement that we need that for the field, and that EEC obviously would take the charge on that. We need a campaign that would lift the field, that provides positive messaging about the field, and that serves as a recruitment and hiring tool for all of us. We are also looking at the models that some other states are actually implementing, with specifically the one in New Mexico. So there's going to be, again, more studying that specific plan or program, I should say. And then going into the next meeting, again, this was a very general discussion, so we need to get a little bit more focus in terms of identifying long-term actions that this group can actually implement, but also some quick wins that will address some of the more urgent issues that our field is facing. So again, for the next meeting, we want to narrow that discussion to identify impact and who's going to be impacted, and bring in the provider and early education professionals' voice into it. Thank you.
Anyone on the work group want to add anything? Good. It's a good discussion, and thank you, Maria, for summarizing. Okay, we'll now shift gears into our agenda items for presentation and discussion, starting with the market rate survey itself, which is to say one final step there, not connected to the rate discussion and the increases in rates, is just that we as a board accept the report that was given to us last month. That's just part of the process, which then triggers the agency to submit the report to the Fed. Make sense? Good. So let's close the loop on that.
Okay, terrific. And I'm going to invite Amy Checkaway to come up for just a moment, too. So we don't have to go in great detail. We spent a long time at the last meeting describing where this all comes from. The state is required every 3 years to do a market rate survey to include geography, the price of care, the different age groups. The federal government requires us, unless we have adopted an alternative methodology, which we very much hope we'll be doing in the next year, but for now requires us to base our payment rates on the findings of the most recent market rate survey. I just want to say I'm really proud of the work that went into this market rate survey for a couple reasons. One is, I think for the first time we had true data around actual prices and costs being charged. There were definitely some problems with the data that I think we can do better, but rather than it being a survey that we relied on those who would respond, we were able to use administrative data through our information technology system, and that gave us a level of confidence, at least in the prices and the costs that are being charged across the regions. And for the first time, we were really able to incorporate this preliminary set of data around costs, which I've asked Amy to come up and remind everyone what comes into the next phase of this. This was a very preliminary part of our work around costs, but essential for us to get this work going, to lay the foundation to what we hope will be a different way of looking at how rates set. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy in a minute, but just from a bureaucratic standpoint, we are already behind in terms of this survey and report was supposed to be submitted to the federal government on July 1st. So we hurried as fast as we could to get it done so that we're not out of compliance, at least on the submission of the report. What will happen now, we hope, with your positive support of just the report itself, so that we may submit it to the federal government. They will review that and then come back with any findings. And we can talk a little bit more about that when we get to the next agenda item. But we will expect some level of findings based on the level of rates that have been identified as part of this study. So Amy, do you want to just highlight a little bit what changes we've made based on comments, and also just remind the board what comes next in the sort of more important part of this work for the future?
Of course, thank you. So in the board materials, you should have all seen a revised market rate study and preliminary cost analysis report. It is almost identical to the report that you saw in September with two minor changes. So first, we wanted to make even more clear what some of the methodology was for the the preliminary cost analysis. And so we just moved some of the detail about methods from the appendix into the main body of the report. So not a substantive change, just a movement of details. And second, there were some minor adjustments to some of the percentile values, and that was based on sort of a final comprehensive review of the data and just some tweaks, but nothing that changed substantively in terms of the findings that we presented. I think second, and happy to answer any questions about the report itself. So really appreciated the discussion and really good questions at the last board meeting, and continue to hear a lot of interest in the cost model that again, the sort of preliminary analysis was included in the report, which hopefully you'll approve today. There is a next phase of this work planned with the researchers who presented in September, and that work will really work to refine the cost model, and the cost model that was first done in 2020 during the early days of the pandemic, and we really want to work to refine the assumptions and really re-examine each assumption made. And make sure that it reflects some additional data that can be brought into the picture that was not yet done so, particularly to try to reflect as best as possible regional differences, which are obviously of great interest, as well as sort of how different program types, specifically, family child care, which we talked a little bit about at the last meeting, center-based programs and after-school, school-age programs, sort of variation of costs in different kinds of programs. So we hope that the next phase of this work, which will take place and has already begun, will really help to inform future discussions about the rate structure, and also conversation about additional investments in program funding generally. So we're excited. We hear this work is important. It's a priority, and we look forward to refining the work that's already started.
And we certainly anticipate that the next phase of work here will help us think about, do we need 6 regions? What do the costs tell us about what rates make the most sense? What kind of rational system? What is the relationship between price and cost, in order to make sure that we're really putting family access at the center and the stability of our program? So I understand that's been a discussion that's happened over a number of years, but I feel with the work of the team internally and also with the support of the researchers from Selfie that we have a real opportunity to think about a new methodology and a new set of structures that could inform our rate setting. So thank you.
And a federal context that is finally also starting to shift towards cost, right? So,
Right.
and I think, to your point, Amy, this notion of looking at regions is in some ways, as I had asked about in September, it's really about looking at the economics of regions, right? And less about physical as much as the community assets and economics. Paul?
Can I just clarify, you had mentioned every 3 years we have to do this. So again, looking towards the future, nothing here prohibits us from having the conversation that we're talking about next year. Like, this doesn't lock us in for 3 years. This doesn't do any of that, does it?
My understanding, and others can confirm, is that, there's nothing that prevents us from having additional conversation at whatever point we're ready.
Our in-house expert is
nodding that
I can't see her.
this concludes our required exercise for this time period. And we would have an opportunity through the findings and discussions with the board and our provider community to propose an alternative methodology for the next time around, which is, I think, of great interest.
So the next time around that we're required to do it.
Right, but I don't think it will not preclude us from making changes within existing structures to the rate structure for next year. So, for example, the federal government requires us to have some level of regional age and program type variation, but it doesn't require us to have 6 regions, and it doesn't require us to have the same structure that we have now.
Okay.
So,
And the SBI could come into it, et cetera, as we sort of did with C3, right? You can think about different formulas. Maura?
So just to build on that, and then one other question. So it sounds like we could sort of set an objective target by which we are having another conversation based on new data for a different approach that's well within 3 years. Do we have where would we go on that?
I think sorry, I deferred a little bit to Amy
In terms of the
around
timing.
Like a year
I
from
think
now, 6 months from now,
the timeline for which the sort of data and next model of cost will be available should be, I think, the foundation for that conversation.
Yeah, so this work will take place this fiscal year, within this fiscal year, and we do hope to make significant progress by early 2023 that may be ready to bring back to the board for discussion. So.
And my second question
Yeah,
is,
go right ahead.
is there anything, you said we were behind? is there anything what can we learn from that? Like, I guess, rather than just say why,
I mean, I think a lot of it was COVID related. I know that's a common refrain, but also real. In terms of what the agency was focused on around COVID guidance and vaccination mandates and other things that I think just kept timelines from being met, but
And
it's a great point.
certainly the conversation in early 2020, January, February, which tied to the strategic planning, had a lot of this as a priority pre-COVID. So again, it's not where we want to live, and it's not meant to be an excuse necessarily, but I think it's a reality.
Well, and the fact that the study itself included this preliminary
That's
cost work and a focus on that came directly out of
That's right.
must have come
Yeah,
directly out of
exactly,
conversations with the
exactly,
board.
Exactly. Okay, so for today, we're focused on closing the loop to accept the report and submit it, and authorize the agency to submit it to the Fed. Does that make sense to everybody? Any last comments or questions? Okay, I have a very long motion. Are you ready? I am. All right, I make the motion that the board, in accordance with general law, chapter 15D, sections 3 and 18, hereby approves, I have the wrong, I'm about to read the EEOST, I'm so sorry. Hang on, that one's long. All right, I've got something shorter for all of us. I make the motion that the Board of Early Education and Care hereby approves the department's 2022 market rate survey and cost analysis, and authorizes the department to include the results as an amendment to its existing CCDF state plan for submission to the Administration for Children and Families. May I please have a second? Thank you, Carolyn. Nikki Ruiz? Yes. Maura Siegel? Yes. Carolyn Kane?
Yes.
Secretary Pizer?
Yes.
Allison Schoenwald?
Yes.
Paul Belcito?
Yes.
Jamila Lee?
Yes.
Maria Moeller?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Approved. Thank you, Amy and team. Thank you very much. Okay, let's turn now to this next item, which in many ways is tightly connected. We have in front of us a rate increase proposal that has sort of three parts, if you will. I'm going to turn it over to the commissioner to talk that through a little on the background and summary. We can think more together about what makes sense for today, ask our questions, have a good discussion, and see where we are as a board.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank
So this is a very complicated year to be implementing a rate increase. And the fact that we have a market rate survey where our federal partners expect us to use it to influence the rate increase, we have some complicated and unusual language included in the state budget. And part of that language actually didn't include the family child care piece of our system. So there are a lot of moving parts to this rate increase. So we're going to spend a couple minutes on background, how we got to where we are, what the sort of influencing factors are, what we're proposing for this year, and then talk a little bit about the impact would be. And I'm going to invite Greg Norfleet, our Chief Operating Officer, to just walk you briefly through the charts on sort of the before and after based on our presentation, and then open it up for some discussion. So as most of you are aware, and Carol Mian Oyama, thank you so much, our in-house expert who was supporting the conversation before and can probably answer all of your questions a lot better than the rest of us. So as you all know, and thank you for your vote on the market rate survey, I think we're all eager to get to the next place. And we find ourselves in a little bit of a bind this year because we have the market rate survey. It is our methodology of record. It is what the federal government will use to hold us accountable for where our rates are. And I think we have broad agreement among us, increasingly at the federal level, among our providers, that the market rate survey is an imperfect tool by which we set rates, and even our own structure within a market rate. On the other hand, it is also better data than we've had in years past, and it does reflect what the market is in those regions, and so the experience of families that are trying to buy into the market in each of those areas. So for a family who is looking at a subsidy that's at 7% of the market rate,
what access they have in that community versus a family that might be at a different rate. So the information, imperfect as it is, and not what we hope will be the future foundation, it does instruct us a little bit about the family experience of our subsidy system and what they have in terms of access to buying into the existing market. So as you've heard, ACF sets an aspirational goal of 75%, 75th percentile, which means families should have access to the 75% of providers. No state, almost no state is at that rate. One state is at that rate. And, you know, we have had $250 million of rate increases over the last several years, continuing, which is just barely keeping pace. So you've probably seen some of these even in 2018. That our rates are pretty low, almost all below the 50th percentile and many below the 25th percentile. In 2018, the last time the market rate survey was done, the rates looked somewhat similar. Again, I think a lot of rate increases have gone in at the same time that costs have increased. At that time, there was a non-compliance finding from the federal government, and they set a threshold that all of our rates needed to be at or above the 25th percentile. Again, focused on families' purchasing power of a voucher or a contract, and what access our rates would set for those families in the market. At the time, they required us to bring everybody up to the 25th percentile. At the time, the agency found internal funding to be able to make those adjustments. Based on our conversations with our federal oversight agencies and federal partners, we do expect, once we've submitted the market rate survey, that we will likely have another compliance finding. They have indicated, although we have nothing for certain or formally in writing, that they will likely set a threshold again, and it will be above the 25th. So the proposal we are presenting today gives us an opportunity to use the rate reserve funding that is provided in the final FY23 budget to both adjust markets, adjust rates generally across the board, fortunately, and also to use some of the discretion provided to be able to adjust those that are at the lowest rate. So further context, so the final FY23, so that's the sort of federal picture. And then the state picture, we're very fortunate with support from the administration and the legislature that there were $60 million included in a rate reserve in the final FY23 budget. What did I say? Okay. With some unusual language this year, so $20 million earmarked with some level of flexibility and appropriate to be applied with an appropriate percentage, $40 million to be distributed across the board in what is a brand new thing for the agency as a quality add-on. If you heard about some of this during the public comment. And that they unfunded, but in the line item was an increase to our supportive add-on. So our contracts that serve teen parents, families involved with Department of Children and Families, and families experiencing homelessness, in addition to the daily rate, get an additional add-on rate. And so the language also included a directive to make an increase to that. So we have the federal constraints, and we have state-level guidance through the line item language for center-based programs. Not included in this language is family child care rate increase for them, but the agency is incredibly committed to making sure that we're not just increasing rates for our center-based programs, but also for our family child care programs. Further complication, you know, our family child care providers are organized and represented by SEIU 509, and so some of what we do with the family child care is also, you'll see, subject to a final collective bargaining agreement with our union. Okay, so now you have the federal constraints and the state constraints. Based on those two things, the agency is recommending a three-part rate increase proposal. The first is to use that flexibility within the $20 million to do targeted increases. That would bring everyone up to the 30th percentile in anticipation of a federal directive to hit a threshold. Again, we don't have certainty that it'll be 30, but we have had some indications from our partners that it'll be above the 25th. We have also estimated what it would be for family childcare to be able to provide that same level of adjustments, and that's an additional $4.9 million that the agency is in the process of identifying the source for, so that we make sure that we're applying the same rate increase strategy approach and amounts for family as well as for center-based. The $40 million that was allocated for an across-the-board will be equivalent to an 8.5%, which is the highest we've had in a number of years, and I know is incredibly welcome. So through this proposal, there isn't any rate that won't be increased by less than 9.24%. So everyone is getting that level of increase. And then for the regions and rates, and you'll see in a minute, where it's below the 30th percentile, there'll be a disproportionate correction to those based using the 20 million plus the additional money for family childcare. And then for the daily add-on rate, we're suggesting it go from $22 to $23, and we know what an incredibly important support those additional funds provide. There isn't a program I visited across the state in the last 6 months who haven't talked about the challenging developmental and behavior for children in the classroom right now, especially coming out of COVID, and kids getting back into the classrooms and what an impact that has on the teachers as well as on the children. We will be proposing that the full rate, as we do every year, that there is a rate reserve, that it get fully annualized into next year so that it would be included in the base. And when we talk about our budget priorities next month, you'll see that represented, that we want this to be fully annualized into next year's budget and included in the base for rates. Okay. I'm going to stop there. Those are the three components of the proposal that we're making. And I'm going to turn it over to Greg and Carol to talk a little bit about what the impact is.
All right.
Just tell me when you want the slides.
Sure thing. Thanks, Commissioner. So on the slide, this is a reminder from the market rate survey findings. You can see anything that's listed in bold is under the 50th percentile. Anything highlighted in yellow is below the 25th. There are a large number of rates across the state below that 50th percentile and below the 25th percentile, as described by the Commissioner. On the next slide, this is what it would look like after the implementation of both the $20 million and the $40 million increases. As you can see, there is no more yellow on the slide, which is great news. There are still bold numbers throughout the state. But this does get us above the 30th percentile with just the $20 million. It does get us above the 30th percentile for each region and for each age group. This is with the addition of the 8.5 as well.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, please.
So these rates, the dollar rates here, do not include the C3 grants, is that
These are
true?
not dollar rates. These are percentiles.
Oh, I'm
But
sorry,
they do
I'm looking at
not.
the wrong slide.
But
Did
sorry.
I jump ahead?
Yeah, but the answer
Yes.
is no.
All right,
The
I apologize for my timing.
Yeah, right. No. Nice segue to the next slide.
But, and by the way, just to
Yeah.
note, we do have funding of $250 million for C3, but that does not take us through the entire fiscal year. There's $150 million left out there, which we're hoping the legislature will enact before they go away or before the year is up, and hopefully sooner rather than later. And just to underline the point, these are federal funds. This is not additional state spending. So in some ways, it's kind of a use it or lose it scenario, and hopefully that will be done. But just to kind of keep in mind, when we get to the dollar figures, there is additional spending on top of all that, and the question is really whether that's going to be sustained over time as opposed to whether it's there at all.
Thank you, Secretary. These numbers are only inclusive of what is included in the rate reserve plus the additional funding for family child care. And we should note this is inclusive of that $40 million quality add-on of what it would look like with that in there, but we don't believe that the federal government will, just as they don't look at C3 as part of our rate strategy, we also don't believe they'll count that $40 million as part of towards compliance, which is why we're so focused on using the 20 to get everybody up to the 30th. All right, and here's what the dollars look like. Here we go. Here's what the dollars look like.
Then on this slide, and the next two as well, you can see we have tables for each age group and by region. The first column shows your FY22 rates. The columns in yellow show getting everyone up to the 30th percentile and then adding a 0.68% universal increase. What that rate would look like at that point is the second column in the yellow. Then the 8.5% increase on top of that, it is taken on the new percentage. So after the increase, we take another 8.5% increase. And then that gets you to the total dollar increase and into a new estimated rate. These rates are estimates at this point, but they will be finalized before the dispersion in December.
So that's for infant and toddlers, center-based. Here's what the dollar amounts look like for center-based preschool and for center-based school age, based on the same sort of formula. Yes, and we hope the future will have a simpler way of calculating rate increases too. And then
the last one is in FCC under 2 over 2 rates, but these are based off of equivalent upgrades. So it's the $20 million invested across the two, 4.9 and 15 million.
So the agency is not recommending in this fiscal year that we use the quality add-on structure for family child care, since that's funds that are outside of the rate reserve language. For family child care, we're recommending it be a more standard increase. So the 30%, bringing everyone up to the 30% plus the 8.5%. So equivalent to the experience of the center-based programs, but done as a overall increase to the rates. Again, no rate is going to be, all rates will be increased by at least 9.24%, and then many rates, as you saw from the chart, will also be disproportionately increased to come up to the 30th percentile. So I'll just do one more thing and then turn it over to discussion, Chair. That's okay. So as we've said, Steve said, we're holding your nose on this one, right? That the current strategy is to use our methodology of record around the market rate survey, which are set by regions, and to use that methodology to both ensure families who are experiencing the current market have access above at least to 30% of the programs, of the 30th percentile, while putting an across the board increase, while we initiate what we hope will be a reform and a fresh look at the way we do both setting of rates and also the structure of rates, so that there'll be a better balance between cost and price, and also more inclusive of our overall funding strategy around operational grants and what that looks like. I think everyone is in broad agreement there is no way we can fund our system based on tuition, whether it's subsidized by the agency or whether it's paid for by a parent. We also know that there are many families who are eligible, even at our current eligibility level, who are not accessing our subsidies and are still having and paying for childcare. So we know that the funding strategy has to be broader than our rates. And we need a good, rational rate structure that gives families who are participating in our childcare financial assistance system equitable purchasing power in the market as much as possible. So we will stop there for questions and discussion.
So I think what might be helpful, Commissioner and team, thank you. I think what might be helpful is perhaps just to level set among us and all of us and ensure we're all operating from the same set of priors, if you will. I think what would be maybe helpful at this moment is to hear, where is there wiggle room? Where is there room to innovate and or respond to public comment and our shared commitment to equity and to a strong system and family access? In the short run, understanding, yes, to the big picture, we have a lot to learn from C3 in terms of how you fund a system. Whether we're talking about C3 and a cliff is in my mind a different issue than what have we learned about what it takes to support operating costs, and how does that work void a methodology like the market rates and actually with a formula that includes the SBI. So here we are, it's October, we need to move immediately, and understand we've got this as the big picture, but what is still on the table for the board and the agency to consider? You've got a recommendation in front of us. Anything else we should be thinking about?
Sure, thanks, Madam Chair. So the agency did run a number of options and scenarios when we were leading up to today's discussion. So we looked at what if we brought everyone up to the 25th percentile, which is the threshold they sent last time, which would allow for an additional 2% across the board. It would leave an unfunded liability of about $12 million for the agency should the federal government come back with a 30%. We did also look at what a strategy might look like that disproportionately increased infant care, because we know programs are going out of the infant care business. I think ultimately we found ourselves in a position in the agency feeling like it was our responsibility within the existing appropriations to make a recommendation at the 30th percentile that we could be wrong, but strongly anticipating that based on the market rate findings, we will have a non-compliance finding and they will set the threshold at 30% or above. And we will be in a position of having to either not have used the money that has been appropriated for this purpose to adjust based on our existing and accepted methodology if we were to make a different recommendation. So I think we did look at a number of different options and tried to understand, and I think what we're really looking forward to is thinking about what that new structure might look like over a number of years that would create a greater rational approach that might also balance with costs. But it is the EEC team's recommendation that we proceed as recommended in order to both allow families in the existing market to have that access and hopefully avoid a non-compliant and an unfunded liability for the agency.
So Commissioner, you didn't mention, that was very helpful to hear the scenarios you ran. Is it not in the wiggle room to look at equitable approach based on region? That's what we heard in our comments.
So I think it depends on who is defining equitable. So under the current
Right, with the market rate approach, the problem is it looks like we're doing just fine out west. When the reality is, if we looked at it at a cost plus.
At the dollars level.
At a dollars level, it's like, why is Metro West, I mean, the amount, the rates are extraordinarily higher at West and Metro West and Metro Boston compared to the West, so.
Right. So using the market rate survey findings, I think one set of analysts might look at this and think about the families who are trying to buy into the market, so 7% or 21%. On the other hand, we're in this awkward moment where we don't have good information to make a change. And we will have good information to make a change. And we're committed to trying to figure that out. But we don't have a methodology beyond the market rate survey right now that is, again, our methodology of record with the federal government. And, I think we do believe, in an order of magnitude that this is accurately reflecting kind of what the market is, not necessarily the costs of the programs, which is why we want to pursue a different methodology. But at this moment, this is the one we have, and it is the one that many other states and the federal government look at in terms of access to the market for families. Carol or Greg, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is the requirement that we were given is that we need to use the market rate survey in the determination of the new rate increase. So that's how we applied it here is really clear. If we were to take a different lens, we would need to write out an explanation of how that relates to the market rate survey.
And the risk of being bold is non-compliance and unfunded liabilities?
So there's an additional one too. So a non-compliance, at least in 2018, when we had a non-compliance finding, and then what the impact of that would be 3% of our discretionary grant funds, which is about $3.8 million. So we could decide we would be willing to take that hit, which would be a reduction in our federal block grant by $3.8 million, but the non-compliance wouldn't go away. So we would still be dealing with that sort of non-compliance issue, and or we decided to take a different approach to true up in a different way, then there would likely be some unfunded liability that we would have to, if we wanted to come into compliance, either take the $3.8 million hit and have a non-compliance that probably carried over, or find additional funds to do it anyway. Yeah, do you want to add?
And
Yeah, Nathan.
they would, so that non-compliance too, if it carried over, it would be that percentage off the discretionary income every federal fiscal year. So it would compound, so after about 2 years, it would equal essentially what we would have had to spend on the rate increase.
I mean, hopefully we'll have come up with at least a path towards a better rate structure within this fiscal year for implementation in the following.
But, and on the basis of the Fed asking for the preliminary cost study, there's no room to kind of, think about how those findings might factor into a transition kind of strategy?
So it's either you have to do a market rate survey or an alternative methodology. If you do a market rate survey, they ask, how did you use the market rate survey to set rates? If you do an alternative methodology, then you can go the cost side and you can show how you use the cost side to set rates.
But they ask for the preliminary cost study.
They do. They still require it, but I think it's as an effort to help move states towards looking at costs instead of just market. They are encouraging states to do that. It's more, but we're still kind of in this middle ground where we still have to use and respond to the market rate.
I mean, so I want to go back to just the timing that you said, Chair, too. We are not, even if the board decides it's not ready to take action today and wants to send the agency back to look at alternatives and risk analysis associated with those alternatives, we don't anticipate that affecting the timeline. We have about 2 months of IT development to do based on the quality add-on. So we would anticipate these funds being, as long as the board decided to take action in November, we would still anticipate being able to get these funds out in December for November billing. So, I mean, we are open to your suggestions and thoughts. We have some strong analytic power, and we could bring back alternatives and options should the board want us to do that. Knowing full well that there may be unfunded liability associated or potentially unfunded liability. I can't really say how long it might take for the federal government to review the market rate survey after we submit it. 1 to 5 months, hard to say.
Yeah, last time I think we received the letter in February after we had submitted for the start of the fiscal year, October 1st. Right now, it's not just ours that they're looking at all the other states, particularly those other states that had the additional year to submit the report by July. So they're kind of looking at all the state data, seeing where all the states are at, and then making a determination from there.
Secretary.
So on the one hand, I think there's a general consensus that the market survey is flawed, maybe deeply flawed, and the design of regions is flawed, underlying all of that. But I think it does represent at least a lens through which to look at access and affordability that's relevant. Again, I wouldn't, if we were starting from scratch, I don't think any of us would say, let's do the market rate survey and peg it to percentiles and then we're done. But it does, as the commissioner indicated, it does reflect the ability of the consumer, if you will, to buy into some percentage of the total market. It's true that depending on how those rates are set, it can constrict the market by reducing supply. But if you look at it through a demand lens rather than a supply lens, it's a relevant number. Again, I'm not defending it, but I am saying that by adjusting the number, we are having a meaningful, or at least a relevant impact on access to the marketplace. So I think it's a positive thing from the consumer point of view. It may be inadequate from the provider point of view, but again, I don't think it's irrelevant. So I guess my only point about all that is, given where we are in the process, given what the expectations of the federal government are, I don't think we have much of a choice but to implement some kind of rate increase based on the market survey. The question is, in some ways, do we go to 30 or 25? And, on the one hand, if we stay at 25 or go back to 25 where we were supposed to be, we may run the risk of having a finding because the expectation is we're getting better over time and progressing rather than just staying in place. And then the other question is whether if we do it at 25, whether it's a purely symbolic act where, we're able to point to the chart and say we moved your percentile, but it's measured in sort of in pennies and nickels instead of dollars. I couldn't say. I think providers are obviously anxious for every penny and nickel in addition to every dollar they get. But I'm not sure substantively how big a difference there is between 30 and 25 from an individual provider point of view.
Paul.
I just want to acknowledge, Commissioner, I'm going to guess you and your team have spent a lot of time on this, so first, thank you. And these questions are awesome, and I have 1,000, but I only ask a couple, because I'm trying to reconcile all this in my head based on what we learned at the last meeting with what we have in front of us today. And I think sometimes it is about how, we may look at the definition of certain words, right? How we look at access and affordability, how we look at equity. I heard, earlier, let's take, like when I see the South Coast Region 5, and I hear there might be concern of C3 grants maybe going away, so this is a way to kind of increase rates. To me, we're still exacerbating the problem there. We've increased some if C3 were to go away, but the most vulnerable across the state are still now going to lose C3 funding, as well as receive less subsidy towards the total cost, right? And so I'm trying to reconcile that. And I'm also just trying to better understand the flexibility with what we have to work in, right? So to me, this is a question of risk. And so if we do the 25th and we don't know what that percentile is right now. We think it will be the 30th, and I trust that based on your expertise and your conversations with folks at the federal government. But we haven't received that. We might get a finding, we might not. If we did get a finding or non-compliant, they say it's 3%, but we don't. Do we know it's 3%? Is that real, or is that just a possibility? And so, trying to figure out like this. There's so much here that I know you've all thought through. I'm not trying to quarterback this at the last minute. I'm trying to understand it so that as we look at how you serve every community across the state and provide access and affordability, that we are prioritizing our most vulnerable. And this to me still, and I know we're holding our nose and I know we have work to do, but I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a provider that has been working hard and grinding to serve our most vulnerable and stick with it. Like we talk about how a lot of people will leave this business. Well, there are a lot of people that stay in this business. And what are we doing to help incentivize that? And so more comments that I'm sure you know, but I'm trying just to, I do feel like it'd be great to see some of those options that you've worked on just to kind of process in our own head the rationalization of how this recommendation came through, just so that look at as we're out in the community, we can be better ambassadors for all the work that you did and the rationale for why this is important or why we did what we did. And I know for me, I'm not there yet to go out and say this is why we did this. Like I still feel like there's more information needed and more understanding and better clarity on how we're serving our most vulnerable. So I'll end it there. I think you get the gist of it. I appreciate all the work you guys have put into this. I really do. It seems really overly complicated, and I can't wait for the day when we can do. You all, especially who do this every day and know deeper how more complicated it is than I do, like that we can look at the different region system. We can do one rate across the state. We can do a gateway city, whatever the rationale is for what we do. Can't wait for that day. But I also just, to all of us in this room, it sounds like from public comment and others, like providers have heard this for a long time. So we have to hold ourselves accountable to do this. And that will also be part of the hard work too.
Other board members, Maria.
I'll just echo a lot of what Paul said, and on a much more simplistic concern is the condition that we were told was the 25th percentile. It was a while back, but again, that's a condition that we have to meet. And I don't, again, I'm not sure about what the risk is that we will actually get find or there's a finding, if we don't meet, if we don't know what, we have to go over 25th percentile, like they haven't said anything, so for me, there's no correlation between getting fined and meeting anything over 25th percentile. So 2%, I will say, 2% versus 0.68, I mean, I do believe it makes a difference if that's where we have to compromise, but.
Can I just ask, because there's a lot of hypotheses here, what if they came back and kept it at 25?
And we've gone to 30.
And we missed this opportunity to maybe do a 2% over at 0.68. Like I'm trying to play it out in my head, and because there's so many unknowns here, but trying to figure out like what best serves the majority of providers.
And we're certain that they won't take, we're certain that the work with, through COVID, LSC3, we're certain that doesn't come into play in their assessment of our overall landscape.
They're looking at the published rates that families
it.
have to pay.
That's it.
Right? They're not looking at
Yeah.
the provider lens.
I know, so we've
and
got
they're
this
like, what can
building.
families buy in
Yeah.
the market based on the price,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. That.
Yeah, that's accurate. I mean, and even the 8.5, since it's a quality add-on, they are looking at what our base rate can buy. We know a provider who only gets the base rate, what that can get. So, right now we pay an extra 3% for infant and toddler QRS level 2 or above. That does not count towards this compliance. And we are kind of theorizing what OCC may do. A lot of this is they made repeated mention to it at the full country conference in DC in July. They stressed again that they want to push states to pay more for their child care, for their subsidized care. We've been on calls with them since then where they've repeatedly said it, they check in on the status of our market rate, and also really have stressed, as we're gonna be submitting this to them, how are you gonna answer that question about how did you set rates based on the market rate? So it's been, while I think we tried to get an answer out of them as to what percentile they might land on, and they wouldn't answer it. But even some of the best guesses we got was that they likely would not stick at the same benchmark they used 3 years ago. They would.
If I remember right, the way you came out of that was that they're going to set a threshold. It's not going to be the 75th percentile, but it's going to be above the 25th percentile. So there is some unknown.
And then we tested that back to them.
Yes, we did.
This is what I heard you
Repeatedly.
say, and that's what I've been saying. And
Just one other observation to make sure we're putting this in the context. So under the proposal, every provider will get an increase of 9.2 or something like that percent. The distinction between the 25th and the 30th percentile would mean that could go to essentially 10.5% for every provider instead of 9.2. And these there's never been, and notwithstanding all the inflation that's out there in the world, these are the largest rate increases that have ever been proposed.
I also think there's a little bit of a just symbolic action, with regards to EEC committing to moving on with regards to the market rate. And we understand that there may be no options right now with, we have to follow the market rate because of past actions. But I think just for the department to show commitment to, and again, I gladly voted for this study because I know it's moving forward with something that we've been waiting to start rolling with for a long time. And sounds like the federal government is also willing to consider that. So if we can just get along or across this or through this with minimum adherence to the market rates, it just would make a statement to the field.
And that's where I was going when I was asking for let's commit to a date by which we will revisit this based on the new data. I mean, what I'm going through as I'm listening to this is I wish the presentation had presented the scenarios you experimented with and the risks and opportunities. It would have helped to make meaning of this versus alternatives just as feedback for the future. And I believe that you put a lot into this, to what Paul is saying, that you've pressure tested all the options. So My feeling is to be supportive of your recommendation rather than send you back to bang out a million other options. Maybe there's a follow-up that you can give us more visibility into the scenarios you experimented with, but I do think like a very clear commitments to a path to change, not vague, could be the path forward.
I mean, I'd like to be able to say that if we were to have the opportunity to implement a rate increase next fiscal year, we would not be coming back here and to the board and saying like, oops, another year went by, but that we would be able to have made progress on the methodology, and that's sort of the cycle and timeline by which we would expect a change. So the work going into thinking about it, restructuring, thinking about the number of regions we have, maybe simplifying, so that we are in a position, hopefully with another rate increase, if there were to be one, to implement it with a different methodology next year.
I'm sure maybe just on that point, and this isn't obviously an ironclad guarantee, so it doesn't necessarily resolve the problem, but it could be that one of the things we do in submitting sort of overall budget recommendations is to include in there language around how next year's rate increase should be handled. And that, whether that's across the board, whether it's based on, cost estimates, whether it's based on C3 methodology, that may be the way of at least putting a line in the sand saying that as a matter of policy, this is the way we think it should go forward. The legislature obviously can do what, or will do what they will on that, but it sort of puts us on record as saying whatever authority we may have, we're going to exercise in this direction.
Other board members, it seems to me where we're at in the conversation is really this question about holding at the 25th. You said that in 2018, and we're sticking there, versus going to the 30th and probably needing some advocacy and some careful consideration about where the funds would come from if we stay at the 25th from percentile. It seems to me that's where we're at. Other board members with other
I don't
comments?
think they're gonna stick at the 25th. I mean, I think that's the feedback that was shared, is that, they're moving ahead. I mean, it has been 4 years, so, and it's that whole effort to move things forward and, make a statement. I don't know that it'll go to 30, but it's not a bad estimate, and it's, the 25 is sort of like, yeah, you needed to get to 25, and to doing all that they asked you to do doesn't exactly, garner a lot of confidence, right? Mm-hmm. You're only gonna do what we make you do.
Yeah. There are some optics to holding at 25. Other folks, for the benefit of conversation, anything nagging, questions?
I have a different type of question. Right, so the issue of this market rate, so it sounds like we're stuck with that methodology because we picked it previously, right? And so my question would be so what's the process for changing the methodology that was chosen so that you're no longer boxed in with the market rate, and I mean on the federal side, right? To say, you know what, we did, that's what we put forth, that's what we've been living by. We'd actually like to revisit that and come at it at a different angle, because that's what I would like to see. I would like to see us get to the issue that was raised about, our most vulnerable and, doing it that way. And, they do the whole region thing, that's one thing. But do you know what I mean? It's almost like, yeah, you want to change horses. So how do you do that? What's the process? And does it take a long time for the feds to say, okay, because we know things do not move swiftly when it comes to bureaucracy, right? But sort of what's the expectation, and when do you start laying that foundation to be able to move from, basically the box you pick to a different box, right?
Yeah, so you have to do either a market rate survey or an alternative methodology for each of the state plan cycles, which are 3-year cycles. We're actually 1 year into the plan. They gave all states an extra year because of COVID for the market rate. So the next one would be due in 2 years. So really it's kind of right now. It's picking what we would do in advance of the next state plan, which would be due most likely July 1st, 2024. And so really it's right now. Now the federal government does have to approve what you are using for an alternative methodology. I think last estimate they gave is they would need, I think, a handful of months to approve it. It might be some back and forth. So it'd be really a conversation to be even starting with them now or even in the next few months to really start talking about it. Yeah.
I mean, why would they, I mean, if they're offering, you know, an alternative methodology, then they need to be open to what those ideas are. And obviously, they should be in favor of making things more equitable for the providers and the children.
And they have examples of you know, alternative methodologies that other states have done. They're willing to provide technical assistance on it. And it's really because they have to approve the alternative methodology, you have to complete the alternative methodology, and then respond to it by the next plan submission, so by July 2024.
But it wouldn't preclude us, so time is now, and we can start working on that. And I think the work for the market rate survey and preliminary cost study, the next phase of that. But it wouldn't preclude us from making some changes within even the existing boundaries around rate setting for next year, for 24.
So what flexibility do we have to make changes because we picked the market survey, right, as our methodology? But then how do we get out from under that and change it on the go forward? So that was where I was coming from.
So we can change the methodology and then use that future methodology, but we can also, within the existing rate structure that we have, we would have flexibility to make some changes to it for next year, even while we're working on the alternative methodology.
That's what I think is important.
Yeah.
We would still have to submit how those kind of new rates compare to the market rate, but that's more of a technicality. Kind of once you've responded and used the market rate initially after you have the results, then it's within our discretion about how we set our rates and how we construct them over the course of the next few years.
Paul?
A couple things. One, I heard this earlier. Can we get some data on waitlist? Who's got the long by region at some point? Just want to see that based on, again, access and affordability. It sounds like Western Mass has a long one, and I know there's still work to be done on the wait list, but just want to understand that a little bit more. And really trying to understand, I'm playing out of my head, you know, what you say to somebody in Region 5 who is going to, yes, got a 9% plus increase and is going to get $72.10, but we stated last month that their cost is almost the same as the person that's getting $111. And so I'm still trying to reconcile that in my brain, not to harp on it, and I know you guys know that, but I think we're all trying to understand this, I know I am, in a way that just makes sense.
But isn't it going to be that our response would be we're going to work on ways that we can make adjustments based on the flexibility that we can identify at this time, and our longer-term plan within the next couple of years is to move away from being constrained by what we feel is an ineffective tool of the market survey.
So what tools do we, but I guess what can we do today? Not literally today, but like, not prospectively looking forward, but like, are there other tools that we have that can help send that message?
And maybe that's the next budget cycle, right? Like lots of this should come into our November discussion about the next budget. And we've learned a lot from C3. We're dissatisfied with an outdated tool for subsidy. The commissioner has made that a priority. We're gonna have to, I think the next tool, from my perspective, is the next budget.
Right.
But maybe it's time to be very bold with a different way of thinking about some of this cost work.
But is there something?
Are you thinking of, does that?
I think it's both though, right? What can we do based on what's already been presented in terms of, like Amy said, right? The commissioner said that like we can look at maybe combining regions, like even like tweaks that you can do within what you've already, within the, basically this, the corral that you're in, right? Where can you move around and where can you change things to make things more equitable? And then, so you do that immediately as soon as you can, right? And I'm not saying certainly not today, but like in the coming months, right? And then for your next budget proposal, you bring up these issues in sort of ways that they can and should be addressed, while you also have the communications with the feds to get out from under that on their level, because it's that two people process, right? Is we can't make decisions for the feds, we have to, basically work within the rules that they set forth. We pick the market survey, obviously not the best decision. Now we want to get out from under that and do an alternative method. But that's just not something that's easily accomplished in a short period of time.
I think what's, there's a lot going on in my brain, as you can probably tell, is I feel like I'm almost voting on something where there are so many unknowns. And not just whether, what the feds might do or what this might happen. Like, and to me, that just feels uncomfortable. That doesn't feel like we're serving the field in the best way. I get the parameters that we're working in. I know how hard everybody's working, but there are just like, we're solving for X in a lot of different places here.
Well, what I heard was a couple of requests for more information to how we landed where we were to, propose a vote for today. So why wouldn't we just kick the can to the November meeting?
Yeah, I have a practical suggestion, which is that we can all think about this a little bit more. I think we do want to think about the 25th and 30th, understanding that it's, sounds unlikely that the Fed is going to land at holding from 2018, but let's keep that as a possibility for all kinds of reasons. I think we could think about that. I think at the same time, it might be great as part of the discussion about the next budget at November's meeting to talk a little about some of these immediate tactics, Commissioner, around our market rate and some ways to keep working on the subsidy small ball while we're working. Slide 17 sort of reminds us we want to get to a new methodology by FY24, right? Which is November's discussion in many ways. So why don't we do this? We can look at the 25th and the 30th. We can talk a little more, including offline, about the risks and how we might manage that if we decide to go 25th and 2%. But also talk about some of the tactics that we're committing to in the short run, while also being clear and public that we really must move towards a new methodology. And that target for FY24 is a very real one and a real commitment. So that's what I'm going to suggest on behalf of the board for today.
Madam Chair, can I just ask, I'm sure we're trying to move on. What hasn't come up, unless I missed it, is whether we can use the C3 program as one of the short-term tools. We know there's longevity, sustainability questions, but to address the disproportionality and the cost side for operating programs, beyond what we're doing, which I know we're already doing a lot to equitably distribute C3 dollars. Is that on the table?
Do you mean relative to using C3 to kind of fill the gaps demonstrated by the
places that they may seem good from a demand perspective, but we know that from a cost side, they're struggling, and this doesn't close the gap. So can we?
Well, can I just jump in on that? So, the C3, so the C3 grant is based on, it has an important component relative to this SVI, vulnerability index, which has an equity bias in it, which is actually a whole lot better than, the analysis here, because it's based on the community, not on the region. And if you go, these regions are huge, and the differences between communities are probably as great, if not greater, than the differences between the regions. Sorry, within the region is greater than between the regions. So, so the short answer is, I think the C3 already is sort of a counterbalancing, counterweight to some of this, and I think, again, going forward, the more we're able to take advantage of it, the more we can address some of these equity concerns that have been raised. But it currently operates in a way that does, I think, provide that balance.
Yeah, and it's got the SBI as part of the formula, which speaks to your point about the variation within. Nikki?
I agree with everything that you just said as a way forward. I just want to bring up a quick other thing that I'd love for us to look at in future meetings, which is a question around, and this was brought up by one of the folks in the public comment, but just a question around historically or in other places, has a rate increase from the state driven up market rates, right? Like for private pay folks, we're looking at a 10% increase. And we know that we're only supporting about 12% of folks who need subsidies, right? And so for all of those other low-income families that are having to pay out of pocket, that are not able to access subsidies, are they going to see a 10% increase in their costs And that's something that really concerns me, especially in a place, in places that we're seeing that after these increases, they're going to be able to access, 80% of the available care. That's wonderful, and I'm very much for increases to the providers, because I absolutely think that we should be paying them, and they should be able to increase their wages and things. But I'm concerned that when we tie it to the individual child, that we are that it could be, and I don't know. This is something that would have to look at other states that have done this and things like that. But I just really worry about the families that are paying out of pocket, because all of the people that pay out of pocket are not like wealthy folks necessarily. The bulk of low-income families are actually paying out of pocket for care. And are we forcing them into unlicensed care or unsafe, neighbors who don't, really know a ton about children, right? Like, I just want to, I want to sort of be very cautious around that. Because I don't want, sort of unintended and knowing that Massachusetts already has the highest cost early care in the country, it's already sort of way out of reach for families. And is funding on the child basis going to just continue that sort of difficulty for families?
Yeah. That's exactly what we need to be thinking about. I mean, I think I'm putting both comments together. I think this year we felt like we needed to keep a bright line between C3, which is about supporting the sector and separate from fees and costs and what's happening for families, because it's filling in some of that market failure that we identified. And, one of the big headlines, and I think one of the things we all appreciate about the market rate study and preliminary cost study, is that it talked about the strategic financing that's needed within the field that brings both the sort of purchasing power for families and with the operational funding. On a practical level, we are operating this year under something called a price limitation waiver. And so there is a rule in the state that, if you're charging the state $10 a day, you have to charge the private pay $10 a day. We have a waiver for that this year. So a program would not necessarily need to raise its rates for families to match the increase in rates that we have. But that is a one-year waiver that we're operating under right now. So that is something that needs to be considered as we think about the structure of rates going forward and what the impact is on family access for those who aren't in our child care financial assistance system, right?
But Commissioner, the other thing, right, is the $40 million is not technically a rate increase.
That won't go into the published
rate.
rate.
And therefore, it does not count towards the floor, if you will, that all the providers have to get above with their private pay customers.
So for family child care, we're proposing, for family child care, we're proposing that it be a straight across, that it be incorporated into the published rates, both the 30% and also the additional across the board at 8.5.
Which has to be negotiated with the SEIU.
Subject to negotiation, yep. But for the center-based programs, the 8.5 will go as a quality add-on. It'll look like and feel like a rate, because it'll go through our system that way, but it won't go into the base published rate. So even in a world where we didn't have the waiver, it wouldn't affect.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is just sort of encouraging the department to think about system building as opposed to the traditional sort of, per child structures for funding this work.
Okay. Commissioner Gregg, Carol, thank you for all your work. We'll look forward to picking this back up again in November and tying it tightly to some tactics around reform in this area and the FY24 budget, along with the idea that nobody is satisfied with the current methodology. We are clear on that today. Thank you again. We have one final agenda item. That is the Early Ed and Out of School Time Capital Grant Program. The top line here is that in COVID, this has been a program in play for a while, but historically has been sort of focused on larger grants. And through COVID, there was an opportunity to say, with health and safety as at the fore, let's think about smaller grants and a more nimble kind of program rather than just big capital projects, bright, shiny new buildings. So that was, by my read, very successful, and we'll talk today about keeping that as a practice, which means some amended regulations and a very long motion. Welcome.
Neil Flynn, very happy to have you representing here.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Neil Flynn. Excuse me, I serve as Deputy General Counsel for the agency. Today, I have some slight changes to our EEOST regulations for the board's consideration. A short presentation despite the long motion, as mentioned, Madam Chairwoman.
The lawyers wrote it.
6 lines, 12 words.
I'm going to prove we can keep things short sometimes. So, as way of background, the Early Education and Out-of-School Time EEOST Capital Fund was created by statute in November 2013 and reauthorized again in May of 2018. The statute allows EEC to administer funds as grants to develop eligible facilities, eligible facilities being EEC licensed large group and school-aged child care programs. These eligible facilities must also have at least 50% of the enrollment slots serving low-income families who are eligible for public subsidy. These grants are to be used to develop and/or rehabilitate these eligible facilities. As you can see from the slide, $6.2 million in grant funding has been allocated for fiscal year 23. And since 2013, the EEOST grant program has awarded $43.1 million to help fund over 91 projects. Thank you. Recently, there have been changes to the EEOST program to promote health and safety during the COVID-19 recovery efforts. Specifically in fiscal year 21 and 22, EEC amended its regulations to allow for smaller EEOST grants in the $100,000 to $250,000 range. These smaller grant awards, these smaller grants allow for more programs to receive funding to make the health and safety improvements related to COVID-19 specifically. Some of these improvements included, as the PowerPoint mentions, outdoor play spaces and HVAC systems, roof replacement, new windows, and indoor space reconfiguration. In fiscal year 21, 36 programs received a total of $7.5 million in grant awards. In fiscal year 22, 17 programs received a total of $3.9 million in grant awards. EEC plans to keep these smaller size grants this year as well. This year we're looking to award grants in the amount of $200,000 to $500,000 because of the continued need for these health and safety improvements previously mentioned. To allow for EEC to do this, we must amend our regulations again in fiscal year 23 in the same fashion as we did in fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. This will be a continuation of the amendments done in previous years. Specifically, the proposed amendments to the regulations will continue to allow the Commissioner to change the length of the grant period, change the timetable for grant recapture in case of default, waive the requirement for a recorded land use restriction against the property, and lastly, waive the requirement for a recorded mortgage lien against the property. Again, all this is to reflect the smaller grant awards we wish to provide this year. So, in summary, today's motion before you is asking the board to approve the draft amended regulations to file with the Secretary of the Commonwealth in order for the Secretary of the Commonwealth to publish a notice of public comment.
Carolyn, Nikki. Thank you, Neil.
It sounds like this has been going on an annual basis to adjust the regs. Is there a way that we can avoid that in the future, to be less prescriptive in what it is that we want to do and change, to just give the Commissioner the authority to implement the grant program? Just a thought. I'm fine with today's vote, but we don't want to be doing this every year, right? If we're going to revise the regs, let's do it in a way that avoids an annual reg, which is a pain in the neck, I know, so.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question and comment, and one we've talked about too, that, you know, we were like, we know we want to continue this right now, but there's other changes that have been discussed over the years in terms of size, scope, eligibility criteria, making sure we're reaching who we want to reach with the grant program, but.
Yeah, and since there's such a variability with regard to sort of amounts and changes that way, so why not just say that, in accordance with, annual allocations or something, the commissioner has full authority to implement a grant program?
I mean, it really did switch from these sort of big center-based grants to thinking about how we were improving spaces
Day to day.
day to day.
It's just a lot
Yeah.
of unnecessary work to revise regulations
I know, and
and
set
get
them up.
public comment and yada, 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 right? So,
So I think what we'd love to do is just come back with a package that changed it for the longer term.
The
Yes.
design principles, the
Right.
implementation principles. Yeah, I mean, if it's all spelled out, then
Yeah.
It's
captures.
when you get overly prescriptive that you have to go back and change, you know what I mean? So that's why
Yeah.
they,
Yeah. The other thing I want to
enough
mention.
detail, but not too much.
Yeah.
Well, though, I suppose we could ask for public comment on that point, and if there was a decision 60 days from now, whenever it comes back to the board to, instead of saying FY '23, just say indefinitely, then we could amend the regulations at that point.
Yeah.
But we would have to seek public comment on it, so maybe if we could do that as part of the posting.
We will. Yeah, that's a
That'd be
great
great.
idea. Okay.
Nikki.
Yeah, I
you
just
jump
wanted
in.
to clarify, and I think the answer is yes, but the reason that family childcare is left out of this is because there's separate grant funds that are available for family childcare, or is there a reason that family childcare was left out of the language?
I mean, they haven't historically been included. This was a sort of large center-based capital grant
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
And as the secretary said in the beginning, I think we've been trying to file additional funds. The administration has, and the governor's sub-budget included money specifically for facilities for family childcare.
Okay, I heard down payment assistance, but would there be sort of
Capital grant.
available for family childcare as well?
It's something the board may consider in its budget recommendations for next year, but
Yeah.
hasn't been traditionally part of this particular funding stream. so.
Okay.
Any
Or would it
reason
be
not
onerous
to?
to include it as part of this funding stream?
Oh, no.
I mean, I'm guessing that the amounts would be lower, obviously, for like updates to a family childcare, but.
By the way, just as an aside on the governor's proposal, in theory, it's not only for the purchase of a home, but it could be for a renovation of one as well. So it could have the same effect, but it's a, different model.
Some of the C3 dollars have
Yeah,
also been
sure,
used for
yeah.
facilities.
Sure,
I mean, I think the answer to your question is like if, obviously the administration has been wanting to do a family childcare capital grant program, which would look different than a program for center-based programs based on the whole facilities, the home ownership, the living in the space. And I think it should be designed specifically for family childcare and in recognition of that sort of unique environment, that unique business model. And this one is very much a center.
Yeah.
Not that we couldn't incorporate it over time, but we would want to design a program that was specific to family childcare. And if that's something the board would like to consider in your recommendations to support what was included in the governor's sub-budget or some version of that, I think that would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we have grant programs to support capital, I think that we should have them available for all types of providers and, knowing what we do about, family childcare providers, sort of struggling to make ends meet and also closing down at alarming rates sometimes and wanting to sort of bolster that field and bring new folks in, I think it just makes sense to really try to provide as many supports as possible.
Also, just like in the center-based programs, it could provide an opportunity for a family child care to go from 6 to 10, serving
Absolutely,
6
yeah,
kids to
yeah.
10 kids, and as a capacity-building strategy, especially in areas where we don't, or new startup grants for family child care providers that want to go into the business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would be great, so something to look at.
Yeah, we will reflect that in the budget priorities for the board if that's
great.
the will of the board.
Yeah. Anything else on this one? Okay. Are we ready? I'll make the motion that the board, in accordance with General Law, Chapter 15D, Sections 3 and 18, hereby approves the draft amended regulations governing the Early Education and Out-of-School Time Capital Fund Grant Program, and authorizes the acting Commissioner of Early Education and Care to file the amended regulations with the Secretary of the Commonwealth for publication of a notice of public comment in the Massachusetts Register, consistent with the department's proposed policy directions and subject to the approval of the final regulations after a public comment period by the board. Can I have a second, please?
Second?
Carolyn, thank you. Nikki Ruiz?
Yes.
Maura Siegel?
Yes.
Carolyn Kane?
Yes.
Secretary Pizer?
Yes.
Allison Schoenwald?
Yes.
Paul Belcito?
Yes.
Jamila Lee?
Yes.
Maria Moeller?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Belzito,
Neil.
congratulations.
Well, with that, we will adjourn today's meeting.
Madam Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, maybe just before we adjourn, you made a fairly momentous statement earlier today.
Yes, please.
I see it in routine business.
And I know that was nominating Paul Belcito to be your successor, and I'm grateful for the vote. And I know we'll have more time to sing your praises in December, if not before. But I did just want to acknowledge what a privilege and honor it's been to serve with you and what tremendous leadership you provided this board and this department over the last 7.5 years. So thank you very much.
And likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.
All of you. It's- With that, there is a lot of work still to be done. Here I am, driving everybody crazy. We will meet in November and pick up very closely in many respects, I think, on the conversations retreat, September meeting, October meeting, drives into November around subsidy, but also this bigger picture of systems building, fiscal models, costing, et cetera, and let's keep going. So thank you all very much for your engagement. All of you who came today for public comment, really appreciate it. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.